On the Theology of the Greeks by Thomas Taylor. Part 1. In an age which professes to be so enlightened as the present, it may seem wonderful that there should be a profound ignorance of the theology and mythology of the Greeks, though an intimate acquaintance with them is of the highest importance to the philosopher and divine, and right conceptions about them in general are indispensably necessary to everyone who wishes to make a solid proficiency in classic lore. But the wonder ceases when we consider that the genuine key to the religion of Greece is the philosophy of Pythagoras and Plato, which, since the destruction of the schools of the philosophers by the Emperor Justinian, has been only partially studied and imperfectly understood. For this theology was first mystically and symbolically promulgated by Orpheus, was afterwards disseminated enigmatically through images by Pythagoras, and was in the last place scientifically unfolded by Plato and his genuine disciples. The peculiarity of it also is this, that it is no less scientific than sublime, and that by a geometrical series of reasoning, originating from the most self-evident truths, it develops all the deified progressions from the ineffable principle of things, and accurately exhibits to our view all the links of that golden chain, of which deity is one extreme, and the body the other. In order, therefore, summarily to unfold this theology, and likewise the mythology which depends on it, I have collected for insertion in the valuable pages of the classical journal from my numerous publications such elucidations on these subjects as have been the result of the study for nearly 40 years of the religion and philosophy of Greece. In the first place, that which is most admirable in this theology is that it produces in the mind properly prepared for its reception the most venerable and exalted conceptions of the great cause of all. For it celebrates this immense principle as something superior even to being itself, as exempt from the whole of things, of which it is nevertheless ineffably the source, and does not therefore think fit to enumerate it with any triad or order of beings. Indeed, it even apologizes for attempting to give an appropriate name to this principle, which is, in reality, ineffable, and ascribes the attempt to the imbecility of human nature, which, striving intently to behold it, gives the appellation of the most simple of its conceptions to that which is beyond all knowledge and all conception. Hence it denominates it the one and the good, by the former of these names indicating its transcendent simplicity, and by the latter its subsistence as the object of desire to all beings. For all things desire good. At the same time, however, it asserts that these appellations are, in reality, nothing more than the parturitions of the soul, which, standing as it were in the vestibules of the adytum of deity, announce nothing pertaining to the ineffable, but only indicate her spontaneous tendencies towards it, and belong rather to the immediate offspring of the first God than to the first itself. Hence, as the result of this most venerable conception of the Supreme, when it ventures not only to denominate the ineffable, but also to assert something of its relation to other things, it considers this as preeminently its peculiarity, that it is the principle of principles, it being necessary that the characteristic property of principle, after the same manner as other things, should not begin from multitude, but should be collected into one monad as a summit, and which is the principle of all principles. Conformably to this, Proclus, in the second book of his treatise on the Theology of Plato, says, "With matchless magnificence of diction, let us, as it were, celebrate the first God, not as establishing the earth and the heavens, nor as giving subsistence to souls, and the generation of all animals, for he produced these indeed, but among the last of things. But prior to these, let us celebrate him as unfolding into light the whole intelligible and intellectual genus of gods, together with all supermundane and mundane divinities, as the God of all gods, the unity of all unities, and beyond the first Aditta, as more ineffable than all silence, and more unknown than all essence, as holy among the holies, and concealed in the intelligible gods." The scientific reasoning from which this dogma is deduced is the following. As the principle of all things is one, it is necessary that the progression of beings should be continued, and that no vacuum should intervene either in incorporeal or corporeal natures. It is also necessary that everything which has a natural progression should proceed through similitude. In consequence of this, it is likewise necessary that every producing principle should generate a number of the same order with itself, namely, nature, a natural number, soul, one that is psychical, that is belonging to the soul, and intellect, an intellectual number. For if whatever possesses a power of generating generates similars prior to dissimilars, every cause must deliver its own form and characteristic peculiarity to its progeny, and before it generates that which gives subsistence to progressions far distant and separate from its nature, it must constitute things proximate to itself, according to essence, and conjoined with it through similitude. It is therefore necessary from these premises, since there is one unity, the principle of the universe, that this unity should produce from itself, prior to everything else, a multitude of natures characterized by unity, and a number, the most of all things allied to its cause. And these natures are no other than the gods. According to this theology, therefore, from the immense principle of principles in which all things causally subsist, absorbed in superessential light, and involved in unfathomable depths, a beauteous progeny of principles proceed, all largely partaking of the ineffable, all stamped with the occult characters of deity, all possessing an overflowing fullness of good. From these dazzling summits, these ineffable blossoms, these divine propagations, being, life, intellect, soul, nature, and body depend. Monads suspended from unities, deified natures proceeding from deities. Each of these monads, too, is the leader of a series which extends from itself to the last of things, and which, while it proceeds from, at the same time abides in and returns to its leader. And all these principles and all their progeny are finally centered and rooted by their summits in the first great, all-comprehending One. Thus, all beings proceed from and are comprehended in the first being. All intellects emanate from one first intellect. All souls from one first soul. All natures blossom from one first nature, and all bodies proceed from the vital and luminous body of the world. And lastly, all these great monads are comprehended in the first one, from which both they and all their depending series are unfolded into light. Hence this first one is truly the unity of unities, the monad of monads, the principle of principles, the God of gods, one and all things, and yet one prior to all. No objections of any weight, no arguments but such as are sophistical, can be urged against this most sublime theory, which is so congenial to the unperverted conceptions of the human mind that it can only be treated with ridicule and contempt in degraded, barren, and barbarous ages. Ignorance and impious fraud, however, have hitherto conspired to defame those inestimable works in which this and many other grand and important dogmas can alone be found. And the theology of the Greeks has been attacked with all the insane fury of ecclesiastical zeal and all the imbecile flashes of mistaken wit by men whose conceptions on the subject, like those of a man between sleeping and waking, have been turbid and wild, fantastic and confused, preposterous and vain. Indeed, that, after the great incomprehensible cause of all, a divine multitude subsists, cooperating with this cause in the production and government of the universe, has always been and is still admitted by all nations and all religions, however much they may differ in their opinions respecting the nature of the subordinate deities and the veneration which is to be paid therein by man, and however barbarous the conceptions of some nations on this subject may be when compared with those of others. Hence, says the elegant Maximus Styrius, you will see one according law and assertion in all the earth, that there is one God, the King and Father of all things, and many gods, sons of God, ruling together with him. This the Greek says, and the barbarian says, the inhabitant of the continent, and he who dwells near the sea, the wise and the unwise. And if you proceed as far as to the utmost shores of the ocean, there also there are gods, rising very near to some, and setting very near to others. The deification, however, of dead men, and the worshipping men as gods, formed no part of this theology, when it is considered according to its genuine purity. Numerous instances of the truth of this might be adduced, but I shall mention for this purpose, as unexceptionable witnesses, the writings of Plato, the golden Pythagorean verses, and the treatises of Plutarch on Isis and Osiris. All the works of Plato, indeed, evince the truth of this position, but this is particularly manifest from his laws. The golden verses order that the immortal gods be honored first as they are disposed by law, afterwards the illustrious heroes, under which appellation the author of the verses comprehends also angels and daimons properly so called, and in the last place the terrestrial daimones, that is, such good men as transcend in virtue the rest of mankind. But to honor the gods as they are disposed by law is, as Hierocles observes, to reverence them as they are arranged by their fabricator and father, and this is to honor them as beings superior to man. Hence, to honor men, however excellent they may be, as gods, is not to honor the gods according to the rank in which they are placed by their Creator, for it is confounding the divine with the human nature, and is thus acting directly contrary to the Pythagorean precept. Plutarch, too, in his above-mentioned treatise, most forcibly and clearly shows the impiety of worshipping men as gods, as is evident from the following extract. Those, therefore, who think that things of this kind, that is, fabulous stories of the gods as if they were men, are but so many commemorations of the actions and disasters of kings and tyrants, who through transcendency in virtue or power inscribed the title of divinity on their renown, and afterwards fell into great calamities and misfortunes. These employ the most easy method, indeed, of eluding the story, and not badly transfer things of evil report from the gods to men. And they are assisted in so doing by the narrations themselves, for the Egyptians relate that Hermes was as to his body, with one arm longer than the other, that Typhon was in his complexion red, but Horus white, and Osiris black, as if they had been by nature men. Farther still, they also call Osiris a commander, and Canopus a pilot, from whom they say the star of that name was denominated. The ship likewise, which the Greeks call Argo, being the image of the ark of Osiris, and which therefore in honor of it is become a constellation, they make to ride not far from Orion and the dog, of which they consider the one as sacred to Horus, but the other to Isis. I fear, however, that this, according to the proverb, would be to move things immovable, and to declare war not only, as Simonides says, against a great length of time, but also against many nations and families of mankind, who are under the influence of divine inspiration through piety to these gods, and would not in any respect fall short of transferring from heaven to earth such great and venerable names, and of thereby shaking and dissolving that worship and belief which has been implanted in almost all men from their very birth, would be opening great doors to the tribe of atheists who convert divine into human concerns, and would likely afford large license to the impostures of Euhemerus of Messina, who devised certain memoirs of an incredible and fictitious mythology, and thereby spread every kind of atheism throughout the globe, by inscribing all the received gods, without any discrimination, by the names of generals, naval captains, and kings who lived in remote periods of time. He further adds that they are recorded in golden characters in a certain country called Pancoa, at which neither any barbarian or Grecian ever arrived, except Euhemerus alone, who, as it seems, sailed to the Pancoans and the Triphilians, that neither have, nor ever had, a being. And though the great actions of Semiramis are celebrated by the Assyrians, and those of Sesostris in Egypt, and though the Phrygians, even to the present time, call all splendid and admirable actions manic, because a certain person named Manis, who was one of their ancient kings, whom some call Mazdes, was a brave and powerful man. And farther still, though Cyrus among the Persians and Alexander among the Macedonians proceeded in their victories almost as far as to the boundaries of the earth, yet they only retain the name of good kings, and are remembered as such, and not as gods. But if certain persons, inflated by ostentation, as Plato says, having their soul at one and the same time inflamed with youth and ignorance, have insolently assumed the appellation of gods, and had temples erected in their honor, yet this opinion of them flourished but for a time, and afterwards they were charged with vanity and arrogance, in conjunction with impiety and lawless conduct, and thus, like smoke, they flew away with swift-paced fate, and being dragged from the temples and altars like fugitive slaves, they have now nothing left them but their monuments and tombs. Hence Antigonus the elder said to one Hermeticist, who had celebrated him in his poems as the offspring of the sun and a god, "He who empties my close stool pan knows no such thing of me." Very properly also did Lysippus the sculptor blame Apelles the painter for drawing the picture of Alexander with a thunderbolt in his hand, whereas he had represented him with a spear, the glory of which, as being true and proper, no time would take away. In another part of the same work also, he admirably reprobates the impiety of making gods to be things inanimate, which was very common with Latin writers of the Augustan age, and of the ages that accompanied the decline and fall of the Roman Empire. But what he says on the subject is as follows. In the second place, which is of still greater consequence, men should be careful and very much afraid, lest, before they are aware, they tear in pieces and dissolve divine natures into blasts of wind, streams of water, seminations, earrings of land, accidents of the earth, and mutations of the seasons, as those do who make Bacchus to be wine and Vulcan flame. Cleanthes also somewhere says that Persephone or Proserpine is the spirit of air that passes through the fruits of the earth and is then slain. And a certain poet says of reapers, then when the youth the limbs of Ceres cut. For these men do not in any respect differ from those who conceive the sails, the cables, and the anchor of a ship to be the pilot, the yarn and the web to be the weaver, and the bowl or the mead to be the position. But they also produce dire and atheistical opinions, by giving the names of gods to natures and things deprived of sense and soul, and that are necessarily destroyed by men who are in want of and use them. For it is not possible to conceive that these things are gods, since neither can anything be a god to men which is deprived of soul, or is subject to human power. From these things, however, we are led to conceive those beings to be gods, who both use them and impart them to us, and supply them perpetually and without ceasing. Nor do we conceive that the gods who bestow these are different in different countries, nor that some of them are peculiar to the barbarians, but others to the Grecians, nor that some are southern and others northern, but as the sun and the moon, the heavens, the land, and the sea are common to all men, yet are differently denominated by different nations, so the one reason that adorns these things, and the one providence that administers them, and the ministrant powers that preside over all nations, have different appellations and honors assigned them according to law by different countries. Of those also that have been consecrated to their service, some employ obscure, but others clearer symbols, not without danger, thus conducting our intellectual conceptions to the apprehension of divine natures. For some, deviating from the true meaning of these symbols, have entirely slipped into superstition, and others, again flying from superstition as a quagmire, have unaware fallen upon atheism as on a precipice. Hence, in order to avoid these dangers, it is especially necessary that, resuming the reasoning of philosophy as our guide to mystic knowledge, we should conceive piously of everything that is said or done in religion, lest that, as Theodorus said, while he extended his arguments with his right hand, some of his auditors received them with their left, so we should fall into dangerous errors, by receiving what the laws have well instituted about sacrifices and festivals in a manner different from their original intention. The Emperor Julian, as well as Plutarch, appears to have been perfectly aware of this confusion in the religion of the heathens arising from the deification of men, and in the fragments of this treatise against the Christians, preserved by Cyril, he speaks of it as follows. If anyone wishes to consider the truth respecting you Christians, he will find that your impiety is composed of the Judaic audacity and the indolence and confusion of the heathens. For deriving from both, not that which is most beautiful, but the worst, you have fabricated a web of evils. With the Hebrews, indeed, there are accurate and venerable laws pertaining to religion, and innumerable precepts which require a most holy life and deliberate choice. But when the Jewish legislator forbids the serving of all the gods, and enjoins the worship of one alone, whose portion is Jacob, and Israel the line of his inheritance, and not only says this, but also omits to add, I think, you shall not revile the gods, the detestable wickedness and audacity of those in after times, wishing to take away all religious reverence from the multitude, thought that not to worship should be followed by blaspheming the gods. This you have alone thence derived. But there is no similitude in anything else between you and them. Hence from the innovation of the Hebrews, you have seized blasphemy towards the venerable gods, but from our religion, you have cast aside reverence to every nature more excellent than man, and the love of paternal institutes. So great an apprehension indeed, says Dr. Stillingfleet, had the heathens of the necessity of appropriate acts of divine worship, that some of them have chosen to die, rather than to give them to what they did not believe to be God. We have a remarkable story to this purpose in Arian and Curtius concerning Callisthenes. Alexander, arriving at that degree of vanity as to desire to have divine worship given him, and the matter being started out of design among the courtiers, either by Anaxarchus, as Arian, or Cleo the Sicilian, as Curtius says, and the way of doing it proposed, namely by incense and prostration, Callisthenes vehemently opposed it, as that which would confound the difference of human and divine worship, which had been preserved inviolable among them. The worship of the gods had been kept up in temples, with altars and images and sacrifices and hymns and prostrations and such like. But it is by no means fitting, says he, for us to confound these things either by lifting up men to the honors of the gods, or depressing the gods to the honors of men. For neither would Alexander suffer any man to usurp his royal dignity by the votes of men. How much more justly may the gods disdain for any man to take their honors to himself? And it appears by Plutarch that the Greeks thought it a mean and base thing for any of them, when sent on any embassy to the kings of Persia, to prostrate themselves before them, because this was only allowed among them in divine adoration. Therefore, says he, when Pelopidas and Ismenias were sent to Artaxerxes, Pelopidas did nothing unworthy, but Ismenias let fall his ring to the ground, and stooping for that was thought to make his adoration, which was altogether as good a shift as the Jesuits advising the crucifix to be held in the mandarin's hands when they made their adoration in the heathen temples of China. Conon also refused to make his adoration as a disgrace to his city, and Isocrates accuses the Persians for doing it, because herein they showed that they despised the gods rather than men by prostituting their honors to their princes. Herodotus mentions Sperchies and Bulis, who could not with the greatest violence be brought to give adorations to Xerxes, because it was against the laws of their country to give divine honor to men. And Valerius Maximus says, the Athenians put Timagoras to death for doing it. So strong an apprehension had possessed him that the manner of worship which they used to their gods should be preserved sacred and inviolable. The philosopher Sallust, also in his treatise on the gods and the world, says, it is not unreasonable to suppose that impiety is a species of punishment, and that those who have had a knowledge of the gods, and yet despise them, will in another life be deprived of this knowledge, and it is requisite to make the punishment of those who have honored their kings as gods to consist in being expelled from the gods. When the ineffable transcendency of the first god, which was considered as the grand principle in the heathen theology by its most ancient promulgators, Orpheus, Pythagoras, and Plato, was forgotten, this oblivion was doubtless the principal cause of dead men being deified by the pagans. Had they properly directed their attention to this transcendency, they would have perceived it to be so immense as to surpass eternity, infinity, self-subsistence, and even essence itself, and that these, in reality, belong to those venerable natures which are, as it were, first unfolded into light from the unfathomable depths of that truly mystic unknown, about which all knowledge is refunded into ignorance. For as Simplicius justly observes, it is requisite that he who ascends to the principle of things should investigate whether it is possible there can be anything better than the supposed principle. And if something more excellent is found, the same enquiry should again be made respecting that, till we arrive at the highest conceptions, than which we have no longer any more venerable. Nor should we stop in our ascent till we find this to be the case, for there is no occasion to fear that our progression will be through an unsubstantial void, by conceiving something about the first principles which is greater and more transcendent than their nature. For it is not possible for our conceptions to take such a mighty leap as to equal, and much less to pass beyond the dignity of the first principles of things. He adds, this, therefore, is one and the best extension of the soul to the highest God, and is as much as possible irreprehensible, namely, to know firmly that by ascribing to him the most venerable excellencies we can conceive, and the most holy and primary names and things, we ascribe nothing to him which is suitable to his dignity. It is sufficient, however, to procure our pardon for the attempt that we can attribute to him nothing superior. If it is not possible, therefore, to form any ideas equal to the dignity of the immediate progeny of the ineffable, that is, of the first principles of things, how much less can our conceptions reach that thrice unknown darkness, in the reverential language of the Egyptians, which is even beyond these? Had the heathens therefore considered as they ought this transcendency of the supreme God, they would never have presumed to equalize the human with the divine nature, and consequently would never have worshipped men as gods. Their theology, however, is not to be accused as the cause of this impiety, but their forgetfulness of the sublimest of its dogmas and the confusion with which this oblivion was necessarily attended. In the last place, I wish to adduce a few respectable testimonies to prove that statues were not considered nor worshipped by any of the intelligent heathens as gods, but as the resemblances of the gods, as auxiliaries to the recollection of a divine nature, and the means of procuring its assistance and favor. For this purpose, I shall first present the reader with what the philosopher Sallust says concerning sacrifices and the honors which were paid to the divinities in his golden treatise on the gods and the world. The honors, says he, which we pay to the gods are performed for the sake of our advantage, and since the providence of the gods is everywhere extended, a certain habitude or fitness is all that is requisite in order to receive their beneficent communications. But all habitude is produced through imitation and similitude. Hence temples imitate the heavens, but altars the earth. Statues resemble life, and on this account they are similar to animals, Prayers imitate that which is intellectual, but characters, superior ineffable powers, herbs and stones resemble matter, and animals which are sacrificed, the irrational life of our souls. But from all these, nothing happens to the gods beyond what they already possess. For what accession can be made to a divine nature? But a conjunction with our souls and the gods is by these means produced. I think, however, it will be proper to add a few things concerning sacrifices. And in the first place, since we possess everything from the gods, and it is but just to offer the first fruits of gifts to the giver, hence of our possessions we offer the first fruits through consecrated gifts, of our bodies through ornaments, and of our life through sacrifices. Besides, without sacrifices, prayers are words only, but accompanied with sacrifices, they become animated words, the words indeed corroborating life, but life animating the words. Add too that the felicity of everything is its proper perfection, but the proper perfection of everything consists in a conjunction with its cause. And on this account, we pray that we may be conjoined with the gods. Since, therefore, life primarily subsists in the gods, and there is also a certain human life, but the latter desires to be united to the former, a medium is required. For natures much distant from each other cannot be conjoined without a medium, and it is necessary that the medium should be similar to the connected natures. Life, therefore, must necessarily be the medium of life, and hence men of the present day that are happy, and all the ancients, have sacrificed animals, and this indeed not rashly, but in a manner accommodated to every god, with many other ceremonies respecting the cultivation of divinity. In the next place, the elegant Maximus Tyrius admirably observes concerning the worship of statues as follows: It appears to me that as external discourse has no need, in order to its composition, of a certain Phoenician, or Ionian, or Attic, or Assyrian, or Egyptian characters, but human imbecility devised these marks, in which inserting its dullness, it recovers from them its memory. In like manner, a divine nature has no need of statues or altars, but human nature being very imbecile, and as much distant from divinity as earth from heaven, devised these symbols, in which it inserted the names and the renown of the gods. Those, therefore, whose memory is robust, and who are able, by directly extending their soul to heaven, to meet with divinity, have, perhaps, no need of statues. This race is, however, rare among men, and in a whole nation you will not find one who recollects divinity, and one who is not in want of this kind of assistance, which resembles that devised by writing masters for boys, who give them obscure marks as copies, by writing over which, their hand being guided by that of the master, they become, through memory, accustomed to the art. It appears to me, therefore, that legislators devised these statues for men, as if for a certain kind of boys, as tokens of the honor which should be paid to divinity, and a certain manuduction, as it were, and path to reminiscence. Of statues, however, there is neither one law, nor one mode, nor one art, nor one matter. For the Greeks think it fit to honor the gods from things the most beautiful in the earth, from a pure matter, the human form, and accurate art, and their opinion is not irrational who fashion statues in the human resemblance. For if the human soul is most near and most similar to divinity, It is not reasonable to suppose that divinity would invest that which is most similar to himself with a most deformed body, but rather with one which would be an easy vehicle to immortal souls, light and adapted to motion. For this alone, of all the bodies on earth, raises its summit on high, its magnificent, superb, and full of symmetry, neither astonishing through its magnitude, nor terrible through its strength, nor moved with difficulty through its weight, nor slippery through its smoothness, nor repercussive through its hardness, nor groveling through its coldness, nor precipitate through its heat, nor inclined to swim through its laxity, nor feeding on raw flesh through its ferocity, nor on grass through its imbecility, but is harmonically composed for its proper works, and is dreadful to timid animals, but mild to such as are brave. It is also adapted to walk by nature, but winged by reason, capable of swimming by art, feeds on corn and fruits, and cultivates the earth, is of a good color, stands firm, and has a pleasing countenance and a graceful beard. In the resemblance of such a body, the Greeks think fit to honor the gods. He then observes that with respect to the barbarians, all of them in like manner admit the subsistence of divinity, but different nations among these adopt different symbols. After which he adds, O many and all various statues, of which some are fashioned by art, and others are embraced through indigence. Some are honored through utility, and others are venerated through the astonishment which they excite. Some are considered as divine through their magnitude, and others are celebrated for their beauty. There is not indeed any race of men, neither barbarian nor Grecian, neither maritime nor continental, neither living a pastoral life nor dwelling in cities, which can endure to be without some symbols of the honor of the gods. How, therefore, shall anyone discuss the question whether it is proper that statues of the gods should be fabricated or not? For if we were to give laws to other men recently sprung from the earth, and dwelling beyond our boundaries and our air, or who were fashioned by a certain Prometheus, ignorant of life and law and reason, it might perhaps demand consideration whether this race should be permitted to adore these spontaneous statues alone, which are not fashioned from ivory or gold, and which are neither oaks nor cedars, nor rivers nor birds, but the rising sun, the splendid moon, the variegated heaven, the earth itself and the air, all fire and all water. Or shall we constrain these men also to the necessity of honoring wood, or stones, or images? If, however, this is the common law of all men, let us make no innovations. Let us admit the conceptions concerning the gods, and preserve their symbols as well as their names. For divinity indeed, the Father and Fabricator of all things, is more ancient than the sun and the heavens, more excellent than time and eternity, and every flowing nature, and is a legislator without law, ineffable by voice, and invisible by the eyes. Not being able, however, to comprehend his essence, we apply for assistance to words and names, to animals and figures of gold and ivory and silver, to plants and rivers, to the summits of mountains, and to streams of water, desiring indeed to understand his nature, but through imbecility, calling him by the names of such things as appear to us to be beautiful. And in thus acting, we are affected in the same manner as lovers, who are delighted with surveying the images of the objects of their love, and with recollecting the lyre, the dart, and the seat of these, the circus in which they ran, and everything in short which excites the memory of the beloved object. What then remains for me to investigate and determine respecting statues, only to admit the subsistence of deity? But if the art of Phidias excites the Greeks to the recollection of divinity, honor to animals the Egyptians, a river to others, and fire others, I do not condemn the dissonance. Let them only know, let them only love, let them only be mindful of the object they adore. End of On the Theology of the Greeks by Thomas Taylor, Part 1. Read by Dan Attrell. If you would like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist. And above all, thank you for listening.